Israel says it plans to allow airdrops of badly needed aid into Gaza, quote, in the coming days. That according to an Israeli security official. The shift comes as the humanitarian crisis in Gaza deepens by the day. Images like this illustrate the growing desperation for hungry Palestinians. The health ministry there says dozens have died from starvation and malnutrition just this week. And though ceasefire talks are ongoing, there's no end in sight for the people of Gaza. More now from CNN's Jeremy Diamond, and a warning. You may find the images in his report disturbing.
There are no bullet holes or shrapnel wounds marking this man's body. His bears the signs of a far more silent killer, starvation. At 41 years old, Mohammed al-Hassanat is one of at least 45 Palestinians who have died of malnutrition in just the last week, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. An entirely man-made humanitarian crisis in Gaza now reaching unprecedented levels. The question now is not whether starvation will claim more lives, but who will be its next victim. Most food stocks have run dry. Malnutrition cases are skyrocketing, and there is only so much Gaza's under-resourced hospitals can do. At one of the few soup kitchens still serving meals, the growing desperation of Gaza's population of more than 2 million is clear as day. 28 Western nations, more than 100 humanitarian aid organizations, and top UN officials have all said Israeli policies are to blame for the starvation crisis now unfolding. That's because Israel imposed a total siege of Gaza between March and May. And since then, Israeli restrictions on the entry and distribution of aid have snowballed into an utterly avoidable disaster.
I don't know what you would call it other than mass starvation. And it's man-made. And that's very clear. And this is because of blockade.
Israel denies it is using starvation as a weapon, pointing to hundreds of aid trucks inside Gaza awaiting UN pickup. The UN says Israeli authorities have repeatedly failed to authorize safe routes to pick up those stockpiles. But the reality of starvation is impossible to deny, including for Israeli news channels, which rarely broadcast such images. Fadia Abu Namus has been in line since 6 a.m., hoping to fill a pot of lentil soup to feed the 9 members of her family. We've had enough of starvation and oppression, enough of staying in the streets like dogs, where no one looks at us, where we can't find anything for our children to eat or drink. Signs of hunger are everywhere in Gaza. This man collapsed while sifting through the wreckage of the latest Israeli offensive. He says he hasn't eaten anything lately but scraps of bread. Moments later, his body gives out on him again. He's simply too weak to go on. Jeremy Diamond, CNN, Tel Aviv.
Horrible situation indeed. We're joined now by Jada Doyen McKenna. She's the CEO of Mercy Corps, a global team of humanitarians working on the front lines of the world's biggest crises, including, of course, Gaza. Jada, thank you so much for coming in. Every day we're hearing more and more about the starvation that's on the ground. What is your team personally seeing when they are there?
Our team is feeling the effects of the starvation themselves. Our team wakes up every morning just like everyone else, wondering where they're going to get their next meal. Some of the things we've heard mothers say to us that their children are asking if there's food in heaven, if that would be better. One team member talked about seeing a girl filling up water at a water tank right next to a sewage area. So standing in knee-deep sewage, trying to get clean water. We visit families and say everyone in the family has infections, scars, sicknesses, all that from lack of clean water, and on top of systems that are people that are depleted from lack of food.
Because we know that dozens and dozens of humanitarian groups are warning that doctors, journalists, aid workers are going hungry alongside what's going on in Gaza right now. and I know your team is having a tough time coping as well.
Yes, for sure. They're like everybody else. The little food that is available, that the March blockade that the Israelis put in also affected commercial goods. The little food that is available is extraordinarily expensive. Our team reported that a sack of flour was going for $480 in the marketplace. So it's just a tremendously dire situation.
UNICEF says that 80%, this is UNICEF, 80% of those who have died of starvation are children in Gaza. And now the enclave is on the brink of running out of specialized food that's needed to save these kids. What can aid groups like yours do with so little food and supplies on hand, at least right now?
Yeah, right now we are providing water and other services, but this is very solvable. It's man-made and it's solvable. We need a ceasefire. We need Israel. We need a resumption of the UN food distribution points and the UN aid distribution system, and we need unfettered access to get food in to serve people. At this point, when people are dying of deaths, this is a long process, and it's a weeks and months buildup. So you go from long-term nutrition deficit to severe malnutrition, ultimately death. At this point, people need more than food. They need malnutrition treatment. They need therapeutic foods. They need medical care. We need to go in with complete solutions to stop this from really tipping into a mass death event.
As you know, Jada, Israel says it stopped the previous aid distribution system because it claims Hamas was stealing so much of that food. What do you know about that?
We have seen no evidence of that, and there was a report today that a USAID investigation going back to 2023 saw no widespread evidence of that. But even if that were the case, the way to prevent that, the way to make food aid less of a commodity or less of a hot ticket to be stolen is to flood the zone and make food and supplies widely available.
The Gaza Humanitarian Aid Foundation, which is supported by Israel and the U.S. for that matter, says it distributed 91 million meals over the last 2 months alone in Gaza. Is that enough?
That's a drop in the bucket. It is not enough. And that is a system where they have 4 distribution sites as opposed to the 400 that are in place with the UN system. People are forced to walk miles and miles. They're forced to cross military lines to enter that system. And that's especially difficult for people who are vulnerable, seniors, women, pregnant people, children, to access those sites.
So Israel now has announced that it's going to begin airdrops of food and other humanitarian aid to folks in Gaza. How is that? How are those airdrops going to be distributed?
Airdrops are a stunt, and they're a stunt. They're inefficient. People die getting hit by food, and it's not efficient. If you're worried about Hamas taking food, you have no control over where airdrops go, no control over the most vulnerable people getting them. And the solution's just very easy. Open the borders, let aid in, let aid agencies do their job. Let us do our work. Airdrops, it's a stunt. It's not meant to seriously address the issue.
Because they say that in order for people to survive in Gaza, you need at least about 1,500 trucks coming in every day with supplies.
That's exactly
Is that right?
That's exactly right. And right now, at the most, we've had 200, 100. It's just nothing. It's a bare minimum. And you've had months of this, of a backup. So what's needed to just replenish the normal systems as well as feed people day to day, you need everything open. You need a ceasefire so that we can move around and serve people safely. An extraordinary number of humanitarians have been killed trying to do their work in this crisis.
And very quickly, before I let you go, there's been some criticism in the past few days of the Trump administration for not having a high-level diplomatic envoy deal exclusively with the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. What's your reaction to that?
Whatever we can do to expedite a ceasefire, a return of hostages, and the resumption of the aid systems, people cannot wait. Every day counts for mothers, for children, for people looking for food and looking for their human dignity.
And it looks like these negotiations that have been going on for the past few days to reach a ceasefire, allow humanitarian aid in, get the hostages out, seems to have collapsed with the U.S. and Israel withdrawing their diplomatic representation from these negotiations that have been underway in Doha, Qatar.
All that's doing is pushing more people to death. That does not serve anyone. People need to get back to the table and do their political jobs.
Jada Doyen McKenna, thanks very much for all the important work you are doing. Thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you for bringing it.
Appreciate it very much.